Hi, my name's Robert Kahn and welcome to Focus on Acting. Vulnerability. What is vulnerability? What is that elusive quality that great actors possess? For our purposes, we're going to define vulnerability as open to attack, or being open. We're going to have a look at two main areas of vulnerability. There are more, but for this purposes, we're just going to have a look at the two main ones, and they lie on a continuum. At one end of the continuum is emotional vulnerability, and at the other end of the continuum, intellectual vulnerability. If you're emotionally vulnerable, or your character is emotionally vulnerable, then they are open emotionally. They're open to attack on an emotional level. What they will do to protect themselves is they'll put up an intellectual barrier. So an emotionally vulnerable person will tend to protect themselves intellectually. Let's say, for example, an emotionally vulnerable character breaks up with their partner. What they'll tend to do is first they'll protect themselves intellectually. Are you sure we need to do this? Things were going really well. We can work it out. They'll go through all these intellectual processes up until the point when they can't keep that intellectual barrier up anymore. Finally, their partner says, no, it's over, that's it, don't want to see you again. Whatever it is. But at some point, the intellectual barrier breaks and it puts them onto their vulnerable side. So that's when that's when the emotion comes out. Now, one of the beautiful things that great actors do is we can see the emotional turmoil that's going on behind the scenes, and we see the intellectual barriers in front of that. So while we can see that this person, they might be angry or they might have this affective emotion that they're putting out there, we can see that it's coming from something else. So they might be talking about whatever it is intellectually. Until that barrier breaks, we get onto their emotional side and suddenly we have this gorgeous vulnerability. And then, after that's come out, it either cuts to another scene or the lights come down, or we see the character try to rebuild those intellectual barriers. Emotionally vulnerable person will protect themselves firstly intellectually. Now, an intellectually vulnerable person will protect themselves emotionally or physically. So if somebody who is intellectually vulnerable, they generally background, they might not have as good an education, etc. If they get into an area of conflict, they're more likely to go to a fight situation or something, an emotional/physical response. So you might be, an intellectually vulnerable person might be in a bar somewhere, somebody comes, spills a drink on them, they're more likely to, say, start a fight than an emotionally vulnerable person who would talk about it. So let's say this intellectually vulnerable person, they get a drink spilled on them, they get angry, they start punching the guy, but the other guy's quite physical too and starts hitting back. There may come a point where the emotional or physical barrier that this person has breaks. They realise they're not going to be able to protect themselves in that manner, so they go back onto their vulnerable side, which is their intellect. They might say, hey, whoa, let's talk about this, let's stop. It's an interesting thing. Now, these two areas lie on a continuum. No one is totally at one end or totally at the other end. We all lie somewhere along the continuum, and in different situations, we have different vulnerabilities. So, let's assume you are going to make up a character. We want to have a look, are they emotionally vulnerable or intellectually vulnerable? Or if we're looking at a specific scene, where do they lie at this point? Do the barriers get strained or not strained? What's happening? Once you can master the intellectual barrier, or whatever barrier that is, and you need to have the stuff happening underneath. That's a whole other thing which we can't get into now. But so you'll have an emotional initial motion happening underneath. You'll put up intellectual barriers, and those intellectual barriers will flex up until they break. We get this wonderful vulnerability come through, and then the character with their humanity will try and get that barrier up together. Or maybe they don't. Maybe they just stay with that vulnerability and we fade to black. Next video we're going to be looking at, I think we're going to be looking at status. Now, if we do status in the next one, all you status fanatics, you impro wizards, it's a must-see one. because people have been toying with status and what gives high status and what gives low status. There's been arguments going for as long as I can remember. Well, I'm going to tell you exactly what will give you high status and low status. A definitive thing that you'll be able to look at a scene or look at a character and go, that character is more high status because of this. You can't miss it. You can't miss it. Thanks very much. I hope you've learnt some more stuff today, and we'll see you in the next one.